What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Chromecast. Today, we have an interview with Dean Bates and Jeff Lalone from VIZOR. We had a great conversation about Chromebooks in schools and how they get managed and some of the problems that IT admins or the person at the school that has been tasked with managing Chromebooks has to deal with, and some of the solutions that they offer. It was a great conversation. They even offered up some great advice and tips at the end. So if you are an IT admin or a technologist at a school district, you want to listen to this one. So without any further ado, here is my conversation with Dean and Jeff. Alrighty, Dean, Jeff, thanks so much for joining us on an episode of the Chromecast.
That's our pleasure. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we've got, I think this is maybe the first time we've done an interview with two folks at the same time. So we're just going to roll with this. We're going to see how it works. Hopefully it goes well. If not, hopefully there's still some good info in here, and that's what matters. So yeah, we've worked with VIZOR in some partnerships and sponsorships over the years. And love what you all do, and we thought it was finally time to sit down and chat and fill in the listeners and viewers on what it is exactly that you all do, and kind of get down into some of the nuts and bolts and some of the solutions that you all have to problems for folks out there trying to manage Chromebooks for schools. So let's kind of start with just a very broad kind of overview of what VIZOR is and what sort of services you all offer.
Yeah, sure. So VIZOR is a software solution, and we help organizations with large fleets of Chromebooks. So Chromebooks are very popular within education. So Jeff and I spend a lot of our time talking to schools and school districts to help them simplify management of their Chromebooks. And to give you an idea of numbers, then the sort of schools we speak to quite often have thousands of Chromebooks, so quite often tens of thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands of these Chromebook devices. And and I guess when you're managing thousands of anything, then it's pretty tricky, but that's not made any easier when there's middle schoolers walking around with these and things like that. So so that's what VIZOR does. It's there to sort of help manage those devices so schools can get the most out of them.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit before we started rolling here. You all aren't dealing with the HP Dragonflies of the world. You're dealing with education devices, which are still great. Those are great devices that are out there, and they serve a very specific purpose. We've talked a long time about how there was this transition in education from trying to give students slabs of glass, with an iPad, and clearly that didn't work. And then obviously Chromebooks are so well suited for this, and easily can be more easily managed in the cloud, and more rugged devices, and all of these reasons that Chromebooks really fit into the classroom better. What was that? What was the timing like for you all, Jeff? I know you all were. I don't know exactly how long you've been in this space. Like, what was the timing like on when was the first customers on board? When were the first school districts on board? And what has the process been like over time?
Yeah, well, we've been in business, first of all, for over 30 years. So we've been doing this for a long time. By this, I mean asset management. We've always had schools and school districts on our client list, but I think that focus switched probably, I'm going to say just under 10 years ago. Right around 8-9 years ago was really when we started switching over our focus. And that was really to do with the gap in the space, within the education space, for management of student devices, right? And so we'd always focused on enterprise, but that switch came, probably about 8-9 years ago into the education space, and really started focusing on that space because of the lack of management for these student devices. As you mentioned, kind of figuring out a way to manage those, to get them into students' hands, to effectively manage the overall process. And I think that it really stemmed from a lack of technology in that space to allow for non-technologists to really be able to work with the devices, get them into students' hands, making sure that there's some form of responsibility and management capability within that environment was kind of the challenge. And I think that's what, identifying that space, and we're working with a specific client, one of our clients, longtime client at the time, in that specific space. Have you got something that you think might help us allow our non-technical users to be able to participate in the management of these handheld devices that are going out to students? That was really where the transition came. And at this point, maybe I'd ask my enterprise clients to put their earmuffs on, but we're like 98% focused now on the education space. We're really, really focusing on that space because quite frankly, it's a more it's a funner space to work in. I feel like we're providing something that's really important for schools, and ultimately doing something that allows students to benefit from technology. So it's nice to be a part of that space for sure.
Yeah. So, and Dean, you had mentioned a little bit about kind of the different levels of school districts that you all are working with. Are you all working with, smaller school districts, just maybe even a one-off school here and there, and then also like the big school districts? Like, who all's using VIZOR, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So from, your sort of small school with a couple of hundred devices maybe, way up to sort of really large school districts with dozens and dozens of schools, and each school having thousands of devices in there. So we're really sort of a wide range of different schools which we use in different devices in those schools. And sort of different amounts of people which are available to help manage those devices.
So it's not just these large organizations, these massive school districts that need something like this. It's valuable, I guess, for those smaller schools as well. That's interesting. So what are some of the common challenges and obstacles that these districts are facing when they're thinking about managing or they're trying to manage now and maybe not doing it as great or as well as they'd like to?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, it kind of stems to your previous question, is in terms of lack of IT people within schools to help manage the devices. And when we're talking about those small schools, then often there's no IT person at all. So it's the teacher who happens to be the sort of most technical, and they're the IT person. So there's a challenge around sort of staffing and the ability to manage them, and that's one of the appeals of Chromebooks. So Chromebooks are easier to manage than Windows devices, and that's why schools move in that direction. But still, there's challenges around that management area, and I think that comes to really a lack of visibility and a lack of process when managing the devices. So schools want visibility on the devices, so what they have, who has the devices, where those devices are, so which schools have the devices, maybe which classroom those devices are in, what state those devices are, so are they in use in students' hands, or are they in storage waiting to be deployed, in repair, are they approaching their end of life, their AUE date, purchase information, warranty information. So there's a lot of data around each of these devices, and schools need visibility on that. And the other side is process as well, so keeping that information up to date. So the data is only as good if there's a process around there. So that's what we do with VIZOR, is we provide the central place with all the information for their Chromebooks, so they can go there and see all of that data in one place, a single source of truth. We help improve processes, so streamlining things like one-to-one programs. So one-to-one programs are excellent. I love those. So where school districts are giving students a Chromebook, so one device, one student. But there's challenges around making sure that students get those devices. And where we can, we're trying to automate tasks as well to reduce the workload for schools in terms of managing those devices. And this is like really important for schools. There's an interesting story earlier this year, a school district in Virginia, and they lost 1,800 Chromebooks. And I think the total cost of that was around $500,000. And that was down to a lack of visibility of knowing what devices they had and who had those devices. So, and no school district obviously wants to make that kind of loss in terms of those resources. Yeah.
And those were just over time devices getting maybe taken home here or lost there or whatever.
Yeah. complete lack of knowing who had what, where those devices were. There's, the absolute sort of basics, which is something, we get really excited about, like all the sort of functionality we can offer, but often it comes down to the basics of knowing where these devices are. And the same district actually in Virginia had an issue where they purchased devices, but they never rolled them out to students. So they had these Chromebooks sitting in storage, complete waste. And that's just because they do not have these streamlined processes in place to get these devices and Chromebooks into the hands of students. That's what we're trying to help with.
Yeah, Jeff, what's the most unique need that a school district's had that you found interesting or surprising?
Yeah, the most unique. So, I guess the management of the Chromebooks themselves provides lots of unique variables there, and each district maybe has their own. But one of the things that kind of surprised me, I'd probably say, is I guess there's two that come to mind. The first one is auditing. So beyond just the basic needs of the management and what Dean was just pointing out in terms of who has what, and those are all really cool, and that kind of gets down to the basics of it. But there's an auditing component that we're hearing a lot of recently, and that's the ability to identify, for example, Chromebooks that were purchased with a specific funding source, being able to justify and meet audit obligations as it relates to that funding source. So you get a specific funding source that was allocated towards the purchase of Chromebooks, and then you purchase them, and then kind of during the pandemic, you got that money, you purchased them, and then there they went. Now what? Now where are those Chromebooks? How many of them are lost? How many stolen? How many went in for repair and never came back, or they weren't able to be repaired? Or what's the story with that sort of set of Chromebooks? So that's something that was pretty unique, for a little bit of a surprise for me. I think the other one, though, that came to mind there, that Dean was just alluding to, the idea of people being able to manage, so non-technical people being able to manage and participate in the management of Chromebooks. So there was a specific need that came. We were talking to a customer recently, and she was saying, I've got these Chromebooks, and I'm asking how many, our licensing, I don't want to get into that too much, but how many Chromebooks do you have ultimately that are in the environment? And she was able to talk about how many were enrolled in the Google Admin Console, but she wasn't able to identify how many of those are being used, how many are in the environment being used, are in students' hands. And so VIZOR, we were able to sort of solve that by allowing for picking up a piece of information from the Google Admin Console, allowing them through VIZOR to be able to identify exactly which ones of our Chromebooks are out in the environment and those that have not been logged into. And so we were able to decommission those for her. So ultimately getting her a very, very quick resolution to the question, how many Chromebooks do I have in my environment? We're able to help with that. So that surprised me insofar as the level of, when you have to go to market and get Chromebooks in, 10,000 students' hands like yesterday, there's a lot that comes up from that, a lot of skip steps, a lot of lack of opportunity to identify the processes that Dean was just referring to. And so I think it surprised me just the level of sort of uncontrolled environments that there are out there, and sort of having something that can help with that is great, but I think that surprised me quite a bit.
Yeah,
I think the challenges,
Go ahead.
Sorry, Joe. I think the challenges that schools face as well, in terms of a very small amount of IT staff having to roll out thousands of devices at the beginning of summer. Like, I can't imagine any company where they have thousands of new employees start and they all want a new Chromebook and ready to go. And schools need to do that every summer. And this is in comparison to big organizations, a really small, really lean sort of amount of IT staff which can do this. So, it always surprises me. I think it's amazing how they managed to do that.
Yeah, we've heard all the stories of the official IT admin at schools that was just the one person who maybe had a Chromebook, or they're like the IT support for their family that just has become the IT person for these massive problems that they're trying to solve, and trying to have Chromebooks out for these kids, like you said. So and we our website, we with some of the data that we see on the back end, we know that a lot of IT admins and folks like that are paying attention to some of the stuff that we're talking about. But we've heard some of the stories of how a lot of this gets tracked in a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So, how is, what if someone's doing that, how is VIZOR different, and how can they maybe even like transition from that to something like VIZOR if they are stuck with that spreadsheet that they have everything plugged into right now?
Yeah, I would say lots of schools come to us with spreadsheets, and that's certainly better than nothing. So that's a good start. But spreadsheets are a snapshot in time, I guess. So, and what you really want is that real-time information in terms of knowing who has what device. And keeping a spreadsheet up to date has its challenges. So, I struggle with a spreadsheet with 100 columns in it. If that had 100,000 columns, I wouldn't have a chance. So, and so what VIZOR does is it places processes around that. So take your one-to-one program at the beginning of the year, then you're not updating a spreadsheet, you're checking out a device with a barcode scanner, and it takes sort of seconds to do that instead of sort of minutes for each device. And again, if you're talking thousands of devices, then that's a quite significant time saving. If devices are coming in for repair, again, it's happening as part of a process. So maybe family members logging into our self-service portal saying the screen's broken, or a teacher's logging a repair. So it's all happening as part of a process. So that's something which you can't really do say within a spreadsheet. And the other thing is integrating. So we integrate with the Google Admin Console, student information systems. So where parent data is, for example, then we can take data from that system and send parents emails when they need to be updated about the status of their child's Chromebook. So it's really sort of bringing all of that data together and adding this process around it, which schools need to help manage those thousands of Chromebooks.
Right. And so, obviously, I say this anytime we're talking about education stuff. I'm learning all of this stuff as we're interviewing folks, and I think anybody that's interested in this sort of stuff is maybe learning alongside us here. But the Google, the admin console is providing obviously like a foundation, I guess, is what you're saying, and then VIZOR's kind of sitting on top of that, taking some of that data and maybe even presenting it in a easier way to interact with. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely right, Joe. Yeah, so the Google Admin Console, we're not trying to replace that. So people continue to use the Google Admin Console for those admin tasks. But what we're doing is providing sort of process on top of that. And you wouldn't want to give the Google Admin Console to, or certainly not to parents, and generally speaking, not teachers. So what VIZOR does is it provides a sort of layer on top of that. So an example would be where a family could log into VIZOR and report a device as lost. And then what we will do is disable that device in the background using the Google Admin Console, and then send an email to the parents confirming the device is lost, and even calculating a fee. So that's what we're doing, is adding that additional functionality on top of the Google Admin Console.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, like because obviously there's the the admin console, especially on the workspace side, we're reporting on that and trying to generally stay up to date on updates and things that are going on there, and it's very robust. Obviously, there's a lot there, but maybe sometimes hard to manage, especially for that unofficial IT person that is trying to manage Chromebooks. So
I was actually going to say exactly that, Joe. Is that there's an extension, beyond the admin console. VIZOR provides that layer, but also that level of simplicity in terms of being able to, again, allow for a larger audience to sort of augment the small technical audience, the small technical team in each district. You're able to recruit new and non-technologists to be able to help with the administrative tasks. So the ability to move a bunch of Chromebooks without limitation. The Google Admin Console has limitations in terms of how many Chromebooks you can move at one time, but Google removes that, VIZOR removes that limitation, right? So you can move, say for example, every single Chromebook in the grade 5 OU at once in VIZOR, move them all to the grade 6 OU. So this is an example of something that allows, for example, a teacher to administer through the Google Admin Console without ever touching the Google Admin Console.
Is this software that is running on machines, or is this in the cloud? Is VIZOR operating in the cloud?
It is, yeah. It's in the cloud.
Yeah, schools love the cloud. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I was just obvious. Like I feel like it was obvious, but I wanted it to be said.
No, that's good. Yeah,
no, you need a PC to run this. Actually, that would be terrible.
Yeah, it comes on floppy disk.
Exactly. So obviously, there's a ton of benefit here for kind of the tech teams, but Jeff, what might be some other examples of how VIZOR might benefit a school or a school district?
Actually, it's funny. I was just on the phone before this one. I was talking to a technologist in out west. Anyway, she was saying that I was telling her a story about students who interact with it. So there's a district that we work. It's actually a school. It's a single school that we work with that allows their students to check the Chromebooks in and out. So what's cool there is that you're engaging the students in the management of the Chromebooks. So again, really sort of fleshing out the team, the small technologist team, allowing the students to manage that process themselves. So that one is one of my favorite ones. It is the ability to allow students to use what I think is a pretty cool feature inside of VIZOR, which is the check-in, check-out process. Super heavy, like in process behind the scenes, but really easy to use. So powerful in terms of process, but simple to use. So not only non-technologists like teachers, media specialists, librarians, but also students are able to use the system themselves. So I love that. That's one of my favorite things to sort of introduce to people. The other, the idea of being able to engage that sort of level of usership, I think, is a really cool feature inside of VIZOR.
You mentioned librarian, and it just reminded me we were doing our big Logitech giveaway where we're giving away the Chrome packs, 30 Chrome packs to one educator, and I was trying to get in touch with my high school that I went to back home, and got a hold of a coach and a teacher, and was asking him who I should talk to, and he was like, "All right, here's her email. She's actually the librarian. She's the one who does all of our Chromebook stuff." I was like, "Oh, perfect." But she was right on top of it and knew everything that we were kind of talking about. It was very interesting. So what sort of advice, if somebody's listening to this, they're an IT admin, or they're a technologist like you were talking about, or they're maybe that librarian who's managing Chromebooks. Dean, what sort of advice do you all have for those folks on managing Chromebooks?
Yeah, so I think one thing I would sort of encourage people to do, like particularly if you've got thousands of devices, hundreds of devices, is to consider the life cycle of the Chromebooks. So, and this is something which often goes overlooked, really. So it's quite exciting getting new devices, new Chromebooks at the start of a one-to-one program. But if you take that time to consider what's going to happen to that device at each stage of its life cycle, then it can really help a school in terms of managing those. So Jeff touched on a couple of those earlier. So in terms of purchasing them, so how are you going to purchase the devices? Is there going to be a funding program? So if you're using a funding program, then you need to make sure that Chromebook is only used by students which meet the criteria of that funding program for a certain amount of years, for example. What will happen at the device's end of life? So are you going to give the devices to students, or are you going to bring all of those Chromebooks back in? And if they're going to come back in, then how are you going to dispose of the devices? That's going to be recycling, sort of donations and things like that to consider. So along each stage, so allocation, repairs, maintenance, then think about which members of staff are going to be involved and what processes you need. So a tool like VIZOR can help, because we can help to automate those processes. But if you go through those steps up front, then that can be a sort of real time saver. Another tip is to have a clear repair policy in place. So when schools go one-to-one and Chromebooks go home, repairs tend to sort of happen. So Chromebooks sort of meet siblings, pets, milkshakes and things like that. So
hopefully they don't get dropped off of a roof like we did with that one Chromebook.
That video. That's a great video. So but that goes to sort of demonstrate the kind of pressures which Chromebooks are under, in terms of needing repairs. So so if you've you've got a clear repair policy, not like a massive EULA, a sort of single page, which you've got a chance that parents will actually read, then what we've seen is that can reduce the number of repairs which you need to do. Jeff mentioned earlier about ownership. Students get ownership in their devices then. Parents understand, maybe the sort of repercussions, the sort of costs associated with the devices. So having a clear repair policy, making sure that's communicated, can save schools and districts an awful lot of money. And provided the Chromebooks don't sort of fly off the roof of a building, then you should be in pretty good shape. So
it was a fun video because we the whole point was that these Chromebooks aren't indestructible, right? Like we put it through the regular paces that it was rated for, spilling, dropping from the desk, dropping from kind of a backpack height, maybe 4 foot or so, and then it was like, all right, well, now we're gonna throw it off the roof and see what happens. Just to show, these things are tough, but they're not indestructible. I'm sure these school districts still get devices that show up that are totally obliterated, and they're like, "How did this happen?" One thing both of you all have mentioned, and it might be something interesting for our listeners to maybe learn more about, because I don't know the ins and outs of it. But during the pandemic, was there, as part of kind of relief for schools, was there a specific fund or program that schools could apply to get additional help for Chromebooks or technology in the classroom?
Yeah, there was sort of various different programs available. Some of those programs are obviously sort of winding up now, but there was by various different governments, so here in the UK and in the US, in terms of getting Chromebooks out to students, and we saw a sort of an uptick in one-to-one programs sort of at that point. There was a lot of ambition in terms of school districts to go one-to-one, but during COVID, then they had to sort of pull the trigger on that, and this was done at real breakneck speed as well. So some of these things we've discussed today, like having consider the process, consider the life cycle of the device, consider repair policies, there simply wasn't time for that. So whereas now, a few years in, then there's opportunity to sort of look back and sort of consider, well, what can we put in place? But yeah, there's depending on the country, a fair amount of sort of federal support there. And another challenge actually schools face is providing auditing to sort of prove that they've used that funding correctly. So whether it was COVID support programs or special education programs, there's title funding, IDEA funding, various different programs in place. But schools need to report on that, and there's an overhead in doing that reporting. So that's where we try and help.
So are you all working with districts or schools who maybe don't have Chromebooks yet or don't have a one-to-one program yet, but they want to? Can they work with you all kind of from the onset to figure out maybe some of these funding opportunities and then have kind of VIZOR in place as they roll things out? Do you all offer that sort of support, or is it more of, hey, once you all get everything in order, we can kind of come in and help, with these processes that you've talked about?
I think it's actually in between those two things. So I don't, not so much at the outset in terms of funding sources and how to purchase the Chromebooks and things like that, though we do work with districts at sort of varying levels of their maturity levels or where they are in that process. But certainly once those Chromebooks are acquired and right from purchase, as soon as they're enrolled in the Google Admin Console, we're plugging directly into each district's Google Admin Console. So we're pulling all that information inside of VIZOR. And we can certainly work with districts who are at any stage of that process, so whether or not they're considering it, and that we can start. In fact, if we could start there with every district, that would probably be an easier place to start. But wherever they are in that process, VIZOR can certainly step in. And with our sort of consulting approach that we take with all of our new customers when we're onboarding new districts, we have a very sort of structured process that we follow that allows us lots of reconciliation, cleaning up of the data. So it certainly does not have to be clean. The cleaner it is, I guess the smoother the transition, but ultimately, regardless of what state the data is in, does not have to be clean for us to be able to work with them. And we can actually start there. And it's probably a little bit of an organic process that we follow in terms of getting completely a ready state or a clean state that then sort of allows automation to take over and all the processes that are out of the box available through VIZOR to take over from that point forward. I think that's a process that, we go through fairly continuously, probably through the first year's contract with each one of our districts. Once we get there, though, then that automation again starts to take over, the power starts to take over, and things get a little bit more autopilot from that point forward.
What, and you all may or may not know, but like what percentage, maybe in the U.S. or rough percentage of school districts in the U.S. are using Chromebooks now instead of other devices, iPad or PC or whatever?
Yeah, I'll let Dean answer that question with whatever detail he can provide. I can only tell you that everybody that I speak with uses Chromebooks. That's just because of the nature of what I do. I'm identifying people who are using Chromebooks and going forward from there. But it feels like a very high percentage. Just anecdotally or maybe instinctively, it feels that it's a very high percentage, but an increasing percentage. I just read recently where I think it was 2020 for the first time. It was 2020 that Chromebooks outsold iOS devices, Apple devices, for in-school use. I literally read that. I think it was this morning. If it wasn't, it was last night on a wiki page. But there it is. So I feel like that's a number that's continuing to grow as well.
Yeah, I mean, just from our perspective, it definitely seems to continue to be increasing. And Google's obviously, heavily invested in education.
It is interesting in terms of Chromebooks in schools, and that we see schools which have got a mix. So they've got iPads on the lower younger years. So at kindergarten, they've got iPads there, and then as you work through the years, various different sort of Chromebooks in, and how they open up those devices and the functionality. And I think Google's done an excellent job in terms of providing a tool for schools, which, it's great to see in the kids' hands. So.
I remember my other question. So we were talking with Logitech about their LogiPen and all of the work that they did to create this pen that kids wouldn't lose and that was comfortable for them to use and was intuitive and all of these things. Are you all seeing, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit, Dean, with the iPads maybe on the younger age, but are you all seeing more and more tablets, Chrome OS tablets for the lower grades, or is it mainly, like you said, kind of Chromebooks that are getting rolled out are mainly clamshell or convertible type devices?
Yeah, I would say they're starting to come in, but still the vast majority of devices we're seeing are clamshells. So your Dell 3100s, we see lots of those out there. The Lenovo 100s, HP 11s, those type of devices, they're what we're seeing at sort of really large volume. And some of those are not touchscreen at all either. So, at the lower level, I think we're starting to see an uptick in terms of Chrome tablets. But there's still plenty of schools which have got iPads and Chromebooks. And that's one thing which VIZOR can do, actually, is it can help those schools with different device types. So where they have Chromebooks, and typically the vast majority of devices are Chromebooks, but the younger years, then they can see those iPads next to maybe Windows devices, which they have for staff as well. So it gives that sort of central place. It'll be interesting to see how Chrome tablets, what effect they have in education. So that'll be good to see.
Yeah. Well, just from a broad perspective, and I feel like these education conversations that we have with folks come around to this idea of, students using Chromebooks, learning how to get things done on a Chromebook, and then they're going to go to college, and what are they going to buy? They're not going to go buy a MacBook. Like they're going to go buy a Chromebook. And that's what really excites us about the education market and how it then applies to the consumer market. We obviously are mainly plugged into the consumer space, devices that you can go buy at Best Buy or Walmart or whatever big box store or online on Amazon. those are the devices that excite us, the consumer models. But this education space, kind of cultivating Chrome OS users for the future, and then into enterprise. As someone's going to work, we've seen it with the marketing firm that me and Robbie and Gabriel all met at. It was MacBooks everywhere, and now you go over there and they've got, the majority of the team using Chromebooks. They even have some Pixel books over there that we're envious of. We don't have one in the office. We need a Pixel book. I don't know why we don't have one. But yeah, this kind of this evolution of a Chromebook user, that really excites us. And we love the work that you all are doing and how you all are helping IT admins or that person at the school who is taking care of Chromebooks and making their job easier and allowing that process for kids using Chromebooks to be easier. And we love that, and we love the work that you all are doing. So keep it up. Dean, for anybody that's listening that wants to maybe learn more about some of the services you all offer, where can they learn more?
Yeah, sure. So if you want to have a look at our website, that's probably the best source. So VIZOR.cloud slash, if you go /unboxed, we're running a promotion at the moment. So any listeners can lock in up to 20% off by using that URL. So that's VIZOR with a Z, .cloud/unboxed. That's a great place, and we've got lots of videos on our website. If you go to our blogs as well, then there's some resources there. And we'll be happy to show you around the tool and see if we can help sort of simplify how you manage your Chromebooks. So it'd be our pleasure to help there.
Love it. Yeah, definitely use our link. It's the best link. It's the best link to use. Definitely use that one. It's down in the show notes.
It's the one that'll get you up to 20% off.
Exactly. So come on. It's easy. Just go click it. All right. Well, Dean, Jeff, thanks so much for taking some time. I do really appreciate it. It's been funny. We were chatting before we started rolling. Dean and I have emailed almost weekly for a while now, so it's fun to sit down and chat and learn a little bit more about what you all do and some of the kind of nuts and bolts of VIZOR and just some of these problems that schools have. I hope that it's valuable to our listeners and viewers. So we appreciate it. Thanks guys for joining.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
What's up, everyone? Thanks so much for watching this episode of the Chromecast podcast. If you like this content, make sure to give us a thumbs up. Go down there and click subscribe, and make sure to click the notification bell icon right next to that so that you get an alert when we put out future episodes. But that's it for this one. We'll catch you all in the next one. See ya.